guys, it's Alice, and today I have a bunch of books that I want to recommend for you guys that I feel like are perfect to read for fall. I've tried to sort these from like the lightest reads to the more darker ones. So the further in we get to this, the more like gorier and creepier it gets, you know? First, we are going to start with Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman. I read this book quite recently, as you may know, and I really enjoyed it. It's set in the 90s in this small town in Massachusetts, and we meet these sisters who come from a long line of witches, and they have sort of grown up as outsiders in this little town because everyone thinks they're freaks. This is just a very charming book, I think. It's kind of on the light side, like it doesn't dig too deep, but it just feels very nostalgic and magical. The second book we've got is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. This is one of my favorite classics and one of my favorite books of all time, and it is of course the story of Jane, who grows up at an orphanage and ends up being hired to take care of this young girl at this huge house owned by a rather troubled, odd, and secretive man. I would say that this is pretty easy to read for a classic, like the language isn't too difficult, and I just love this book. I love reading about Jane, and I feel like especially the part when she gets to this house is really atmospheric and kind of dark, and it's just a beautiful book. We've then got another Bronte related book, and it is Glasstown by Isabel Greenberg. This is a graphic novel, and it's obviously partly based in reality because the Brontes were real people, and we know that they, together as siblings, created this imaginary place. But this sort of introduces us to all of the Brontes and takes us into this imaginary world of theirs called Glasstown. Just the color story of this feels very autumnal to me, and I just love the artwork in this, and it's kind of a melancholy book in some ways, and a little gloomy and kind of dark, and it's just perfect for when you want something really atmospheric. Another one of my favorite books that I feel like is perfect for this time of year is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I won't go on about this too much because I know that I mention it a lot, and so do a lot of other people, but this is a literary fiction novel about a group of clever and eccentric college students at this elite college, and they get themselves into a little bit of a situation. And I just love this book. I love the writing, and I just feel like it's the ultimate book for fall. It's very like dark academia, if you know what I mean. Next, I would recommend for this time of year to read some stories by Edgar Allan Poe. Now, I'm not necessarily recommending you read this whole tome because it's quite big, but maybe finding some stories by Poe that you think sound intriguing. It could be fun to read them for fall because his stories are quite atmospheric and kind of dark, and yeah, I really like them. My favorite by him is The Telltale Heart, and I also really like his poetry. That's also perfect to read for this time of year. Yet another classic that I've picked out is, of course, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I feel like a lot of the books that I like the most are books that are like very appropriate for fall, so there are a lot of my favorite books in this video. This is, of course, the classic story of Dr. Frankenstein and his monster, which I'm sure you're aware of, and I just love this book. It's kind of scary in parts and creepy, and it's very atmospheric. Like, there's a lot of like thunder and lightning and like mountains and raging storms, and it's awesome. I think I say this every time I mention this book, but I'm gonna say it again. The first part in this book is a little bit difficult to get through, but I promise it's worth it to like get to the middle where you get to read from the perspective of the monster, because that is just amazing. Then I've got a recommendation that is very sadly only for those of you who can read Norwegian, because there isn't an English translation of this for some reason, although there might be like other translations into other languages, I don't really know, but it is De Døde Stjerne by André Bjerke. This is about a group of young people who decide to travel up to this cabin in the forest to investigate the suicide, or the apparent suicide, of one of their friends, and this is just super creepy. It's set like right out in the middle of the Norwegian forest, and it's like borderline scary. I will say this does have quite an outdated view on women in it, but I still think it's worth a read if you just ignore that part. Then we've got a book that I read quite recently and really enjoyed, and it is The Strings of Murder by Oscar de Muriel. This is a historical fiction mystery novel set in Edinburgh in 1888, where we meet a Scotland Yard inspector who is sent off to Scotland to investigate the murder of this violinist, and he finds himself teamed up with a very superstitious Scot. I think the historical setting of this is just incredible, and this is set at like the height of the Jack the Ripper situation, so that is like going on in the background, and our main characters are absolutely insufferable, but they're so entertaining to read about, and the mystery in this is really good. We've got like the occult and curses and the devil and all kinds of awesome stuff. Second to last, we have got The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. I didn't really know where to place this on this list because this is kind of a light read in some ways, but then it also has some really gory scenes, so I don't really know where it goes on like the darkness scale, but I'm just putting it here. This is set in the 90s in the suburbs in Charleston, and we meet this book club who gets involved with this mysterious stranger who moves into the neighborhood. This is very entertaining. It has some good atmosphere and some really creepy and kind of gruesome scenes, but also a lot of like dark humor. And I feel like this is just like the perfect mix of being fun and entertaining, but also creepy and kind of dark. Lastly, I had to include Perfume by Patrick Suskind. I feel like the word to summarize this book is disgusting. Like, it's absolutely disgusting, but I'd still recommend it because it is a really good book, even though it is kind of weird. It's set in 18th century France, and we meet this boy who has an incredible sense of smell, and he starts like collecting scents. I feel like this leans more towards creepy than scary, and the main character is a very interesting creature, and I think that the way this describes like time and place is amazing, and the way that it describes smells is just incredible, and you just like, you have to read it to understand what's going on, but it really is something. Okay guys, those are all the books that I had to recommend for you today. I'd love to know if you guys can think of any books that you feel like are perfect for fall, and I will see you soon. Bye!